Hello, everyone. This is a pre-show note that I am putting in after production because we just did a very interesting interview with George McMillan, returning guest. We had him on the channel about 2 years ago last time, and we wanted to bring him back on to explore some of the deeper questions surrounding both the situation with the Ukraine war, and especially in the Middle East post Assad. So, in the interest of time and editing, we decided to break this up into two parts. So this will be part one, where we talk particularly about Ukraine, Russia, and more of the European theater. And then as we move on, I'll have it up probably tomorrow is the goal, but we'll see how long it takes for the full editing process to get done. Is to have part two, which is focused mostly on the Middle East and also to some extent East Asia, um, India, etc. But just in the interest of time and for the flow of the show, we decided it would be best to break it up into two parts. So I hope you guys enjoy, and we'll see you on the other end. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into a very special episode of the War Report. Now, we have a returning guest with us today, and that is George McMillan III. George McMillan III, whatever you prefer. It's completely up to you. But you may remember we did a program with him about 2 years ago at this point. I think that was December 2022. And with the rapid events in the Middle East, which I'm sure you all saw this week, we put out our last episode just 12 hours before the Assad government fell, so we have a lot of catching up to do. We're going to really break that down and get into it and try to get to the bottom of it, at least to the best of our abilities, over the next couple hours here. But first, GSP does have some Ukraine updates for us.
Okay, so yes, I'm anxious just as much as you are to get to the Middle East news. But first, we'll take care of some homework, and that is the battlefront news out of Ukraine. The first slide is in Kursk. The yellow outline that you see on this map is a recent incursion of the territory that the Ukrainians have gained by the Russians. So this is just south of Sucha. So the Russians have moved. They've taken about half of what they lost since August and September of this year. And there's only one road linking the Sumy region with Sucha. Oddly enough, it was built by the Soviets. So what the Russians will want to do is cut that road off. In any case, so this is so the speculation right now whether the Russians will do this before Trump's inauguration or not. Honestly, I don't think the Russians care one way or another whether Trump is inaugurated or not, or how that will change just about anything. So that's for Kursk. So this gain is from roughly, I think, about a day or two ago, not from today. Today is Thursday, December the 12th. The next slide is out of Toretsk. Again, this is from 2 days ago. And you can see the areas the Russians have consolidated now in the heart of Toretsk. They've managed to push back the areas that the Ukrainians took from them the previous week and the previous week from that. And so if we go to the third slide, you can see that the Russians now have captured basically what is the largest terracon in Toretsk, right next to another large one, but quite a bit smaller next to it. The Russians have also captured they've captured all the high rises. So the third slide, that's what it's basically showing you, is they've captured the high rises and they've captured the entirety of the industrial plant. And as things, have gone in this war, as soon as one side has taken the industrial and the high rises, it's kind of GG, well played. We saw that in for instance, in Avdiivka, we saw it in Krasnogorovka, and now we're seeing it in Toretsk. The fourth slide from the top gives you an overall image again of where Toretsk is located. It is south of Bakhmut, but that's it for Toretsk. Let's go now to the southern Donbass and see what is happening in Korekhovo. So in Korehovo, you can see the Russians have made some gains, but so have the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians to open up the string of villages along this river have recaptured. I believe the name of the town is Konstantinopolsk. So Konstantinopolsk is has been recaptured today by the Ukrainians. The slide after that gives you kind of like a blown up image of it. To the right of that, the Russians have made a small, tiny gain. Now, it is a strategic gain because basically what it does is it cuts off the road for everything east of it. And so all that blue circle, that blue patch that is east of that gain, the soldiers that are in there are essentially trapped. They will not be able to get out. Now, how many? I don't know. One of the things that Wheat Union suspects is that there's a breakdown in communications that is happening, and that this might be why things are going the way they are. I tend to think that I don't discount that. I'm sure that it happens since both sides use electronic jamming to break communications, particularly during the time of battle. But in many ways, as I've said on this show before, the reason that Ukrainians try to maintain a pocket for as long as possible is it stretches the front line for the Russians and it delays the inevitable. That is why they do it. Now, there are losses. There's indications that the Ukrainians are now losing more men that they can replace. And we'll come to Pokrovsk, but there'll be a very salient example of that explains what I'm talking about. Now let's move to Korehovo proper. You can see that the Russians have started making gains. They're well within. They've captured over half the town. They've captured most of the high rises, and today they made a tiny gain in the south. And again, you see another pocket. That pocket, that little bit of blue, is a high-rise complex. So for the Ukrainians to get out of there, it will not be easy. And the only thing that remains now in Korehovo is that to the area that you see in blue, that is an industrial zone. There is also a mine there. And the water reservoir to the north of the town that you see outlined in that pale grayish color, that stops any attack from the north. So really, the Russians have to go straight forward, and if they can, from the south. They have to flank from the south as well and overcome the trench networks that you see in the fields just south of the town. Let's go to an image of where the fighting is taking place north of Korehovo. You can see that the Russians have made gains there today and yesterday. They've expanded their area of control over the northern part of Korehovo. Well, it's not really Korehovo. It's just a town. It's Stary Terny. And they took over a fortification just north of it. And so now you can see in this section, you can see how Korehovo is getting pincered, right? Now, above the gains, you can see another pocket that's forming that the Russians are closing in on. And that is just north of the town of Stary Terny that I just mentioned. The Ukrainians are slowly getting pushed out of there because you can see also some vertical gains of them. This is an area that they will have to clear if they want to keep their men. This is a close-up of the Stary Terny gains that the Russians have made. And you can see that pocket to the right that is formed. Yes, and so the next slide is you can ignore the next slide. Now let's move to Pokrovsk. I've circled Pokrovsk where it is. Again, this is the major hub in the Donbass, as we've mentioned countless times. You see where the blue ends. The blue is the outer boundaries of the official um, um, province or oblast of Donetsk. On the other side, in green, that's Dnepropetrovsk, or as the Ukrainians call it, Dnepr. Uh, the Russians, the last 2 days, including today, you can see that they're now well underneath. They're south of Pokrovsk, and they're going to start flanking it from the west. So they're moving ever westward, and I imagine that they will soon start to go northward. Let's take a look at a close up of this. The slide next below. This is just basically a small gain, a farmer's field. This is Novotoretske is the name of this little village where the Russians are moving out of now. There is a fortification that was captured there. I don't know if these slides indicate that. And I don't think they do, but the latest news before we started recording today, is a fortification about 3 kilometers outside the city limits of Pokrovsk was taken by the Russians. And Butusov, a Ukrainian mill blogger, mentioned that the only reason it was taken was because there was no one in it. And apparently it cost them over 10,000 US just to build it. So they're very disappointed by this. But this, again, as I mentioned earlier, seems to typify what has been happening since the Kursk incursion. And that is, the Ukrainians simply don't have enough men to control the gains of the Russians in the Donbass region. And so now this will actually just make it that much easier for the Russians to eventually take Pokrovsk. I should mention that there are 3 elite brigades were sent back, maybe not in full because some of their detachments are still in Kursk, but the 72nd, the 47th, the 79th. To me, it sounds from what I've been listening to and reading that there are in both areas, both in Kursk and Donbass. Maybe they've been moved in their entirety. As I said earlier, Konstantinopolsk, south of Korehovo, was captured by them, and I do think it was it was one of those elite brigades that did it. Next up is Chasov Yar. So the Russians have been making several gains this week in Chasov Yar. They've renewed their efforts, and essentially now they have captured the industrial sector of Chasov Yar. They already control some high rises, but in this close-up of Chasov Yar, if we go to it, you can see that immediately adjacent to the industrial area that the Russians captured today, this was a very hard-fought piece of territory. But immediately adjacent are high rises. So this is still quite a fight. But the Russians are interested in getting this territory, and the reason, of course, as we've mentioned countless times, is Chasov Yar is the highest area for dozens of square miles around. And so this will give them the kind of overview that they need. The next slide, the second from the bottom, gives you an idea of where Chasov Yar is and where Konstantinovka is. This is the big Konstantinovka, not the little Konstantinovkas that you've already heard about in southern Donbass. That's the thing in Ukraine. You're gonna hear names of villages that are the same, but they're separated by dozens, if not hundreds of kilometers. Anyways, in this slide, you can see where Konstantinovka is, and I've drawn this arrow to indicate all the string of towns like Kramatorsk and Slavyansk that link with it. You can see why the Russians would want that. And Konstantinovka is it's in the lowest part of this region. In fact, Kramatorsk and Slavyansk are also in very low-lying areas. And then the last slide, the overall look of the front, you can see that the Russians now what they want to do is they want to begin emanating after taking Pokrovsk. They're going to want to emanate in different directions to bypass all the trench networks that were set up, right? They're not going to try to break every single trench network head on at all places. They need an opening in one area, and then they want to do flanking maneuvers afterwards. I still don't think that you're going to see, big arrow offensives. These arrows are just to indicate for our listeners and watchers what I think is the strategy that the Russians are going to employ, particularly in the winter. And it would behoove them to take Pokrovsk, to focus on Pokrovsk more than any other town right now. So Toretsk, Chesov Yar, Velika Novoselovka will have to wait, I think, because Pokrovsk is just that crucial. And being winter, fighting in Novoselovka, the town itself won't be that difficult because, of course, they have paved roads, but the area around it isn't such the case. Chesov Yar, Toretsk, of course, very well paved, but in other areas, big flanking maneuvers. I mean, I haven't seen a lot of mud yet, but I suspect it should begin somewhere in Ukraine. Although I must say, this year the Rasputitsa has not started with the kind of force that we saw in 22 and 23, and that's it basically for the Ukrainian battlefield map updates. I will say this: the Ukrainians have launched the ATACMS, I think, for the second time. There was an intermediate attack of Storm Shadow missiles by the British. The ATACMS, of course, are the attacks are done by the Americans. Yes, I know there are some Ukrainians inside those HIMARS trucks that play some kind of a role, but they don't play any important role. Maybe pressing a button when told to. So there was an attack on a town called Taganrog, which means like the horn of Tagan. And this is a small city or a medium-sized town. The Russians claimed that 6 ATACMS were shot. 2 were intercepted. 4 were pushed off course by electronic warfare, but they landed in a military compound, particularly one in a parking lot that I saw. Now, how honest are the Russians being here? I don't know. To me, it sounds like some of them probably met their mark. The other thing I'll say is in Donetsk, there was an officer that was assassinated. I don't know how high-ranking he was, with an improvised explosive in his car. There was another attempt which was stopped on the outskirts of Donetsk, like not in the city, but close to it. And the man was arrested. Again, he was told to go to a certain location where he would find these materials. So you can see just how much, behind enemy lines penetration the Ukrainians still have in these regions. Although I will say this, as unfortunate as this officer getting killed, we're not seeing the kind of deadly terrorist attacks that we saw in 2022. That has to be mentioned as well. And maybe the other big sort of Ukrainian news is Macron is again talking about sending 40,000 so-called peacekeepers, not all French, they would have to be from various other NATO countries, to help Ukraine. Now, why is this? Is this to send them to Kursk? Is this to, like, what are they going to do with them? Will they go areas where Ukraine's brigades are sort of waiting for a possible attack, maybe in Zaporozhye? Are they going to free up Ukrainian forces in the south where things aren't quite as hot, like Kherson or Zaporozhye? I don't know, but Poland has said that they will not do it. There was a meeting between the French and the Polish over this. So, it's another example of, like, I mean, Macron has made these statements several times this year, and a lot of it might be the fact that, his government has kind of collapsed. His prime minister has had to resign. He was asked to resign. He refuses to do so. He claims there was an evil alliance of the far right and the far left to oust him. But what he's really not telling you is that there are enormous fiscal problems in France. Its welfare state spending to GDP is twice that of Germany, and we've gone over this topic on the show, considering Germany's decaying industrial complex due to the Nord Stream being blown up and no more cheap gas. I will say this: last week there was an article that they are buying now more gas vis-a-vis third parties from Russia than they are from the U.S. So things have moved, back to the norm, back to the mean, because that's the one that makes the most amount of sense. This country next to you with all this, rather than going thousands of kilometers over the Atlantic Ocean, solidifying and desolidifying natural gas on tankers is, of course, not very cost effective. But what did you guys want? Did you guys have anything to say about the situation in Ukraine?
I just had the one thing to add, which is, fortunately, Kiev did reject the decision to go forward with lowering the conscription age, so there is still some sense of self-preservation from the Zelensky government, or Zelensky regime, if you prefer.
Yep.
And it looks like it's just going to maintain status quo, but I do maintain to my theory that if they are eventually going to lower it, if this war does continue into the new year, which I'm almost certain it will, but if it does continue well into 2025, they will gradually lower it. They'll knock it down to, say, 22 or 23. They won't go straight to 18 until they have to, but I do think within the next few months, probably the next 6-7 months, they are going to try to take it down to 21 at the lowest.
Yeah. George, did you want to add anything to some of the Ukraine updates?
Oh, no, that's I don't really follow that granular. I mean, I knew all the places that you were talking about.
Yeah,
but it's
it's slow moving.
My big deal from the beginning was, a friend of mine had me post on David Petraeus's post, and I thought it was a repost rather than his actual LinkedIn page. It was actually his page. So anyway, what I'm saying now is the same thing I said then. If you look at the 2010 election map of Ukraine, it's got the Catholic Ukrainians in the West, and it's got the Russian Orthodox speakers in the East, because their big deal is, Russia is going to go straight towards the Polish plain in the north, the Arabian plain in the left, and they're going to be in Paris before you know it. And we have this big fallback plan of guerrilla warfare plan. Okay, they've been saying this in Stars and Stripes and Army Times and these other stuff, I mean, for like 15 years.
Yes.
So if they've been writing about this in open source material for that long, that means the Russians have read it too.
Yes.
And that means that's not exactly what they're not going to do.
Yes.
To avoid the guerrilla warfare, you just have to look at the map and say, okay, they're only going to go into those Russian Orthodox areas, and then they won't have to experience that. And then the Ukraine speakers are going to be leaving and going west anyway. Yep. So it's already self-segregating. So it limits their chance of having a guerrilla war. And then, I believe since Russia's been fighting a defensive war, they pushed forward, they made their defenses, they pulled back, they're fighting the defensive war now. So yes, and plus they're sending way more steel, to the west than's coming back at them. So yes, I believe, they have a 4-to-1 or 5-to-1 KIA WIA ratio for the Russian Federation for the Ukraine, because Ukraine's tacking. The attackers always have a higher attrition rate. So again, it backs up what I wrote in writing at the beginning of the war. Yeah, it looks like the Russians have stuck to that model, for the reasons I just explained. The other thing is, and I've been talking about this on Felix Rex show, the whole Russian attack for no reason narrative is pathetically stupid. The movement of NATO eastward is to block in all of their ports.
Yep.
During the Cold War, and this is what I've been talking about on the other. Oh, by the way, for the people that aren't used to me, I'm also doing my Russian natural gas and geopolitical realignment papers. I did them on Energy Newsbeat last winter, and I'm also doing them and the sea power versus land power dichotomy strategies on Energy Newsbeat as well. So that's
Great.
where people can find me, for more in-depth videos. Okay, that
Excellent.
being said, what they had during the Cold War, the Anglosphere, the sea power, always had the maritime choke points. So with the collapse of communism, it was about taking over the terrestrial and riverine choke points. So in a non-military situation, the way you do that is you move the EU, you move a trading bloc. The EU is a trading bloc. You move that east, and then you want to cut off the whole entire European peninsula from Russian trade. Because
that's right, and that's when you introduce the tariffs.
Yes. Okay, right. So the purpose of moving a trading bloc is trading barriers and non-tariff trading barriers. Because on the first Felix Rex show, I was talking about that in the context. If you wanted peace, they would have gone with the Intermarium or the Three Seas initiative. It used to be called, back in World War I, it was Joseph Pilsudski's Intermarium project, where where Poland and Ukraine combine, and even the Baltic states combine to control the area between the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea. And then the updated version of that they talked about, in the 2000s or late 90s or early 2000s, was the Three Seas project. Three Seas being the Baltic Sea, Black Sea, and the Adriatic. If you had that a neutral zone, meaning no tanks, no rockets, no offensive weaponry, and you had that as a free trade zone where the people could trade either way, that would have been a peaceful solution.
Yes.
Okay, I bring these things up because Americans are not aware of what the other options were. If you know what the other options were, then you're going to wonder why the West was so eager to move the EU east. The other thing that Americans don't know is because they don't know how this stuff works, they don't know why the EU association agreements had these NATO riders in them with Office Security Cooperation Europe, FMS sales, foreign military sales riders in these documents. So you're moving the EU east, and then the people have 10 years to train to NATO standards. So there's I got friends that train all over the place. They're training them up to NATO standards because it's effectively de facto they brought them into NATO, but not officially. So that's the trick. And by doing that, then you're taking over the riverine and the terrestrial choke points also, because terrestrial choke points are areas between mountains and a river or mountains and a sea. So they're trying to control the Polish plains and the Bessarabian plains.
Yep.
And that's why they moved NATO, the EU and NATO, to Romania and Bulgaria to control the Danube River Valley, so Russia does not have access to support the Slavic countries in the Danube River Valley. They also diplomatically pressured and stopped the Nord Stream pipeline or the South Stream pipeline in between 2011 and 2012 by heavily influencing the elections in Bulgaria.
Yep.
And why you do that, because any way you can get natural gas to Germany, it's not just Germany you're worried about getting natural gas and then aligning with Russia and leaving the petrodollar. You're also worried about all the other, German world countries and Slavic Danube River countries exiting the petrodollar system also. Then that undermines the trilateral commission alliance between, because here's the crescendo here, between the alliance of North America and the Western Power Center, and then the first island chain strategy with Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and the Philippines. And I'll end it there.
Yeah, I just want to add one little factoid to what you said about Bulgaria and the South Stream. I remember this day very vividly, that the Americans were very upset that the Bulgarians were going to do this. Of course, Bulgaria has the Danube going through it just as Serbia does. And the day that I forget which American politician or dignitary or representative of the Obama admin came to visit, but the day that happened, there was a terrorist attack in Sofia. Bulgaria is a country that terrorist attacks are extremely, extremely rare. Like, honestly, like, they're no more common in Bulgaria than they are in Poland or Czech Republic. They are extremely rare. And I mean,
where
to
did
me,
it happen in Sofia?
What's that?
Where did it happen in Sofia? Where?
The images that I remember seeing is a part of, like, it's very urban. There's a part where the road goes down, like it's about to go underground, where the traffic is. I mean, it was at least 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's either down by the train station, or it sounds like it's over by by their cultural hall.
Right. It was very visible. Like, you can tell that, like, whatever kook they got to do this was, and it was meant to happen when the American dignitary arrived in Sofia, right? That was to scare them, to let them know that they can toy with them. You better not go through with this, et cetera, et cetera. And Bulgaria can't really, it's a vassal. It can't really decide one thing or the other. Not really.
And on that same note, I did want to point out with this, it all links back to the events going on in Romania right now with the nullification of the first rounds of the election by the Supreme Court, that Georgescu, who isn't that radical, all things considered, he does represent a departure from the status quo, but once again, it's a lot of people like to oversell what he is.
Yeah.
He has been thrown out. He's been effectively cast out as they're building one of the largest NATO installations in the world, and as the conflict in Ukraine escalates, as it heats up, and we're seeing the fortification, solidification of that NATO position.
Yep. Just as really you were saying, George, about moving eastward, Romania first is accepted into the EU, then NATO, and then, instead of having the largest NATO base in Germany, that is Ramstein, it's now going to, I don't know what they're going to call it, but it's going to be ever eastward in Romania, close to the Black Sea.
So, again, I keep on going back. Okay, I did the first series of videos with Felix and Working Brother on the 5 and 6 power center strategies from George Kennan, with his 47 long Telegram article, and then his 50 his X article in 1950 in Foreign Affairs. So for the people out there, these are very famous documents. So please Google them and get the
Yep.
Wikipedia version at least. So yeah, these are
George Cannon, you mean? George Cannon?
Kennan.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah. So yeah, he was the ambassador in Moscow at the end of World War II, and
Yep.
he wrote the long telegram. And what he was doing was he was operationalizing Speakman's Rimland versus Heartland strategies.
Right.
So yeah, that's how it's operationalized. Because I did my first ones, I just used the okay. I updated the 5 power center doctrine to a 6 power center doctrine to include India as a newly industrialized country,
Yes. Yeah.
or a country that's been industrialized since then. Okay, it
Right.
wasn't then, but it's a big player now.
Exactly.
So I was talking about, if you have Russian natural gas, why is that the biggest fear of the West? And why did the West move heaven and earth to stop Russian natural gas? Because once a country is infrastructurally integrated with another one with a cheap source of energy, then it's economically integrated, and then the diplomatic and the military integration happens afterwards. Your dime integration, diplomatic, infrastructural, informational, military, economic, and your national instruments of power measures. So that's how that's how global realignment occurs. And yeah, Russia's just selling gas, but it doesn't matter where a Russian gas line blows up, inside Russia or outside Russia. The aim is to stop the natural gas going to the end user in Europe or any coastal rimland industrial power center, the ones like the ones in Eurasia. And to stop stop the end user from eventually paying in rubles and exiting the petrodollar, and then C, leaving the Western alliance and joining some kind of Russian alliance, because then that shifts the global political center of gravity from Washington and London. Okay, if the connection is going to be to Germany, then you shifted it to Berlin and Moscow.
Yeah.
And since then, with these sanctions and with this, it's like John Lewis Gaddis has been saying all along with Professor Peter Cohen. John Lewis Gaddis is the biographer for George Kennan, and he's one of the leading grand strategists at the Yale Grand Strategies Department.
Mm-hmm.
So he was saying that the Clinton and Bush and Obama administrations are pushing Russia and China together when you're supposed to push them apart. Well, this encirclement strategy that the Wolfowitz doctrine has been in place since the global war on terror has pushed them together. So now there is a definite Moscow and Beijing connection as a nucleus. So then you would be adding a Berlin, Moscow, Beijing connection. And then with the pipelines going from Hokkaido Island or Sakhalin Island to Hokkaido Island, I've been talking about this, on the other shows, then that would have a connection between Japan and Russia, and then they would leave the U.S. alliance. And then there's also, since 2014 at least, the discussion and planning of the Vladivostok and the Korean Peninsula natural gas pipeline, which the United States has then been heavily influencing the elections in both Japan. Shinzo Abe got assassinated, so that's the amount of that's the way that election process has been influenced.
Mm-hmm.
And then South Korea, they're keeping the pro-American leader in there, the one that just did the martial law thing.
But can we just stop just for a second, just to talk about a little bit about what happened in South Korea? Because on the last show, there was a bit of uncertainty, and now we have more information that it's come through, and what it seems to have been was this. Some have hypothesized that, the whole ridiculous story about North Koreans in Kursk, Russia, there were never any North Koreans in Western Russia anywhere. And they certainly weren't in Kursk fighting the Ukrainians. That was basically to get the South Koreans to give more armaments. But the coup attempt, which was, embarrassing, it had a plot where they would take some of the because South Korea wanted to send more military hardware to Ukraine, and things along these lines. And the lawmakers in their government, basically in their parliament, said no, like by 80%. And so what they wanted to do was have a group of these guys essentially kidnapped, and they would be executed. There was I forget who was it, Blue something on Twitter did a thread on this, Blue Top or Blue Ceiling. I forget the name of it, but so what they wanted to do was kill some of these guys to intimidate them, and the guys who were going to kidnap them would be dressed in North Korean uniforms. Like, how do North Korean guys end up, in Seoul, Korea, like, and what's the most guarded border in the world, is phenomenal, right? But that lets you know just how stupid they think the public is. But and then this group of kidnappers, they were supposed to get summarily executed as well, and this was supposed to set off like some kind of panic in this. Anyways, it completely failed. So those are the two things I've heard. I think the theory that they wanted to send more armaments, they looked at, like, yes, everybody understands that the so-called North Koreans in Kursk is the reasons why Biden said you can attack, with ATACMS in pre-2014 Russia. Because I don't know, because 10,000 North Koreans are that deadly. Obviously, it was ridiculous, but it was there also to guilt the South Koreans into doing something more. Anyways, thankfully, it completely backfired, and we'll see what happens next. But that's all I have to add.
Yeah, because with cheap natural gas, that would then take, if they connected to Russia, then the United States loses its first island chain strategy with Japan and South Korea and Taiwan and the Philippines. And the reason why I go over this stuff on this show, for people that haven't heard my past discussions, is you now have the by moving NATO east, they effectively cut off Russian natural gas from going to Germany. So, but then they expected Russia to economically collapse and splinter.
Yes.
So then that never happened. So then they've cut Germany off from natural gas. Their industries are, collapsing. They used to produce, Volkswagen produced 7 million cars, a few years ago, and now they're down to 4 million. So it's cutting almost in half.
Yep.
All right. And we already war gamed on my old Telegram channel that was a couple years ago now, how time flies. We already knew this was way before Nord Stream blew up. Either they're going to fix Nord Stream, or the German industry is going to go out of business, or they're going to move their plant and equipment elsewhere. And I was expecting Schultz to cave in and certify Nord Stream 3 and 4, or Nord Stream 2, pipelines 3 and 4. And instead, the pipelines just blew up. So they took the whole democratic process off the table. So somebody played that option for them. Of course, there's only, once you know that the goal is to keep the global political center of gravity from shifting, well, then you pretty much know who wants to protect, the petrodollar and who wants to maintain the status quo on the alliance system. Talking about Kennan's 5 power centers strategy.
Yep.
The U.S. has got to maintain its allies in Western Europe and the first island chain in Japan, and Russian natural gas going to the axial ends of Eurasia completely destroys both. In the history of sea power versus land power strategies, that's that would be like a Ratzel-Haushofer-Dugan alliance, and that's what it is that they're trying to stop. And I'm throwing these strategists in there so people can just go on Wikipedia and get a skinny about him, or go on YouTube and watch videos on this so they know what I'm talking about. Why am I saying that? Because these books and these strategies are well known inside the military academies and war colleges and a very, very few of the elite universities. Then they're not taught at all outside of them. So this is basically like highly important information. I'll use the word important as opposed to any other term, that people can actually research themselves if they know what to look for. I'll leave it there.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that has happened since the beginning of the war in Ukraine is it has actually accelerated the decline of the use of the American petrodollar. Like if you think Russia, like I don't know how much Russia even used the ruble to buy and sell things using gas and oil to India, which is a huge buyer. It is like the biggest buyer right now, and it sells at an inflated price to Europe. But it does all of that in rubles. And rupees. There's no, like before the SMO, that wasn't the case. It is the case now. And it's also the case with China, another huge buyer, right? So it's amazing. And of course, America always makes these like little exceptions for itself because, like, I don't know how many people know, but America still buys oil and gas from Russia as well as uranium. Like that still goes on. Just so people, like, I think people forget, right, that they're, underneath like this sort of text of war, there's a subtext that contradicts the whole notion of a war that is constantly being played out.